Yesterday, President Joe Biden addressed the nation in a live address at the Uvalde, Texas sites where just an absolute tragic situation happened a year ago, and somebody goes into a school and kills children and adults, and it's obviously something that triggers a lot of people to want to have something done. What is that something to be done? That's the point of debate across the country, and we're seeing that here in Illinois with the gun and magazine ban that's been challenged, and whether or not it's constitutional under the Second Amendment, and eventually there's going to have to be conversations about whether this violates the Fifth Amendment because there's a gun registry component as part of Illinois' law enacted earlier this year. So those debates are going to happen, and they're happening in the courts. And it could get all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they are expected by a lot of analysts to look at the recent precedent they made concerning the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association's lawsuits against the state of New York, where the Supreme Court essentially reiterated and simplified the Heller decision that they made years ago and said that you have to follow text, history, and tradition. You can't just come up with, ideas that you think might keep the public safe, and that's why you're saying you need to curb constitutional rights. So that argument distilling down to text, history, and tradition, that's really going to be in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, if not from Illinois' case, then from other cases around the country. And we've already seen various smaller cases with individual pieces, use the Bruin decision, as it's referred to as, out of New York, as the impetus for reviewing those laws. But President Joe Biden, of course, talking about gun control yesterday at the Uvalde, Texas location. And here's some of what he had to say as heard live on ABC.
I realize this is a really tough day for all the families. Remembering is important, but it's also painful. 1 year ago today, Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, turned into another killing field in America. A few days later, Jill and I traveled there and stood before those 21 crosses outside the school. On each cross, a name, like in these candles behind us, 19 children, 9, 10, 11 years old, and 2 devoted educators, and 17 more injured. We spent hours with the grieving families who were broken and never, ever will quite be the same. To the families of the children and the educators who we know that 1 year later it's still so raw for you. A year of missed birthdays and holidays, school plays, soccer games. Just that smile. A year of everyday joys gone forever. The bend of his smile, the perfect pitch of her laugh. At a vigil a few months later, one of the moms said, "When I lay in bed and turn to my side, envisioning her staring back at me, I want so badly to be part of alternative reality that just doesn't exist. This is my reality, because my 10-year-old daughter was murdered in her 4th grade classroom."
Listen, absolutely tragic, no question, and something I think is appropriate to recognize those lives lost and the absolute devastation families are feeling. But then you've got the president and others across the country calling for gun control and saying that, for instance, they need to ban, quote, assault weapons. And defining, quote, assault weapon as a semi-automatic rifle that takes an extended magazine, for instance. And we've seen that law here in Illinois enacted, but challenged on constitutional grounds in both state and federal courts. And I think that there's going to have to be a reckoning within the courts, especially the U.S. Supreme Court, to actually either one way or the other define what a government can and cannot do when it comes to commonly owned weapons. That individuals have a Second Amendment right, as they see, to possess those weapons. And again, the Second Amendment, it's real simple. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that Second Amendment is pretty simple to understand when you break it down. But if you want to infringe on individuals' Second Amendment rights that aren't bestowed to people by government, they're bestowed to people simply because they're people. If you want to infringe on that, you're probably going to have to go about amending the Constitution. And I don't know if there's going to be an appetite for that. Of course, that's a arduous process, a long process that involves a lot of different states that have to hop on board, and whether that threshold could even be realistically reached when you're talking about limiting or being able to allow government to infringe on that Second Amendment right. That's a fight politically, I think, could turn real sour real quick. So while we hear all of these horrible stories, and they are tragic stories, the story out of Uvalde, absolutely horrifying. The Parkland shooting, no question, absolutely horrifying. Even all the way back to the Columbine incident. But you can't also look the other way when you've got gun violence regularly killing children in the streets of Chicago and other large municipalities across the country. So how do we stem violence, I think, is, a question that has yet to really come crystal clear for an answer, because there's too much focus from some on the tool that might be implemented versus the intent or the individual and what drives them to violence. So these are going to be ongoing conversations, and I just don't know where it's going to go. But we will take a look at all sides of it here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's Morning News, I'm Greg Bishop.